Before we start on the next section, I just want to take a quick aside here and make mention of the fact that if you add a whole bunch of to-dos and you find that your list is getting really long, in our Firebase dashboard, we can actually edit the data in here, and we can even delete items. So let's say that I've stacked up 10 to-dos or so. All I have to do is hover over an item, click the X, and then click remove, and poof, our item is suddenly gone and we're back to our empty data store. Getting back to the topic at hand, let's spend some time building out the list of our items. So thinking back to the mock that we looked at earlier, each to-do item needs a checkbox indicating whether or not it is complete. Thinking back to how we show complete our items in header, we determine whether a property or a to-do is done or not based on the property done. So we're going to use this done field to determine whether or not the to-do is complete. That means that when we actually render our items and we show a checkbox next to them, the value of the checkbox needs to reflect the value of the property done. But first, let's start by refactoring our list here just a little bit. We're going to pull some logic out for rendering a single item. So let's start by creating a new file, and we'll call it list item. Flipping back over to list, let's do our refactor first. So we'll require in list item, and we're going to require list dash item. Cool. And then inside of our for loop down here, instead of rendering an li, we're going to render an instance of list item. And don't close that tag right there. We'll close it like so. Do a little bit of cleanup. And then we need to pass in our properties here. So we'll pass in item, which is going to be this expression right here. And we're also going to add another property in here. This is going to be a little bit of a surprise. I'm going to bring this one out of left field. Bear with me though. We're going to call it key. Okay. So if you remember from a previous section, this .props.items at key is referring to a specific to-do item that we have. And if you remember, key was our identifier out of Firebase. It was that long string of characters. So your question might be, well, why are we passing in the key as this key property? Gets a little tongue-tied there. So something that we haven't spoken about in React in great detail is how lists of content are rendered. You might have noticed in many of our sections, whenever we've been rendering a list of items, we get this warning message in here that says each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key property. And it's the lack of assigning this key that has been bringing up that warning message. So what the warning means is to keep track of which item in the list is which between renders of a component, we need to manually specify a unique key. So the key has to be unique. Since our Firebase keys are guaranteed to be unique, we're going to use that as our key. Again, the key is something that we are always going to specify. So if you're working on your own project and you're building up a list of items and you see that warning pop up, that means, hey, you need to specify a key and you need to make sure that it's always going to be unique. You can get away without specifying a key, as we have in previous sections, but it's recommended to give a key to your list items for performance reasons in React. So one more thing in here that's just a little bit awkward. When setting the key in our JSX, like we've done, we don't actually get access to the key property inside of our component. So remember, anything that we pass in through JSX is usually available on props, right? Well, it just turns out that React has decided that they're going to trim that key property off. So we do need, inside of this list item component, to have access to that key. So we're going to do a little bit of work in here to make sure that we get that key in as well. We're going to say item, var item is our item. So this would this item right here represents a single to-do, and then we're just going to assign a key property to it. And then we pass an item, it's going to be just item. So let's run through the loop one more time. We're saying for every to-do we have, grab the item, assign the key on top of the item, so we now have a property on our to-do called key, and then push it into, or create a list item with the item and the key, and push it into our children array, and the children array then eventually gets rendered up inside of our render function. So we've now defined our implementation of list item inside of list. Let's flesh out list item. We're going to do our usual boilerplate at the top. Module.exports react.create class. We'll add our render function. And from this, we'll return our li. And we'll say, let's just put our text in here, make sure everything's working for right now. We'll say this.props.item.text. So remember, we are passing in the item and we're passing in the text. And you know what? Let's do this just to make sure that we've got all of our information here. I'm going to put a dash. We'll say this.props.item.key and this.props.item.done. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and we're going to get our re-render, and we don't have any content yet, so let's add a to-do hello. And okay, so it looks like we got our text, we've got our ID, and it looks like we're actually missing our done flag. Let's flip over to Firebase on the dashboard and make sure that we're getting done. Okay, so my mistake. Done is Boolean, which means that JSX is just not going to render it. So there is a false property on here, but it's just not showing up inside of our HTML. So I think that we're reasonably assured that we have all of our props in here right now. Let's delete all this, and we're going to fancy up our HTML just a little bit. So instead, there's going to be a little bit of typing here, bear with me, but it's going to be worth it. So we'll do a div with class name input group, a span, class name input group add-on. Inside of the span, we'll have an input with type checkbox, and then we're going to do a self-closing tag on the input, so / and then close the tag. Outside of the span, we'll have another input of type text, and I'm going to do a new line just for formatting, class name of form control, and a value of this.state.text. And bear with me here on this this.state. We haven't assigned this.state.text yet, but we'll get to that in just a second. And then we'll do another self-closing tag for that input. And one more group here. We're going to do another span with class name input group btn button. And then inside of this span, we'll have a button, class name btn default. And then in here, we'll just put delete. So I mentioned the value of input. Remember, when we set the value to be equal to state, that means that we're creating a controlled form component. And that also means that we need to initialize our state. So we'll say get initial state function, comma, and we'll return text. And in as opposed to other cases when we've immediately returned an empty string here, we want our starting text to actually be the to-do item. So we'll say this.props.item.text. And let's do just one more little, we're going to add one more CSS rule over inside of our index.html. So we'll go open up index.html. We'll add input group, and this will have a margin bottom of 15 pixels. And this is just to work around some of the defaults in Bootstrap. It's just going to make things look a little bit nicer for us. So let's save our index.html, save our list item. Come back over and hey, all right, that looks pretty good, not bad. Let's do one more thing in here. We're going to add a horizontal rule between our header and the list. And to do that, all we have to do is go over to app.jsx, find our header component, and we want right after it to be a horizontal rule. So we'll just say hr/. Save. Looks good. Now if you'll notice, we've still got a little bit of padding in here, and that's just due to how Bootstrap treats ULs, unordered lists. So let's come over to our list, and instead of having a UL being returned from our render function, we'll do just a div. Save. And there's our full length list right there. And let's make sure that it looks good. Full screen. Looks pretty good. I like it. Okay, so we're at a good spot here, but we've got some familiar issues. If I click in here and type around, I'm mashing on my keyboard right now, nothing happens. I can click my checkbox, refresh the page, but it looks like the state of that isn't being changed, or excuse me, updated. And then if I click my delete, nothing happens. So our app looks pretty good, but we don't have all the functionality we want. So in the next section, let's focus on updating and deleting to-do items.